Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm going to keep this water close by in case I need it. So I know several of you in here, and if you've ever been to an SBOM working group meeting, you probably have heard me talk about SBOMs and everything. So I work at Schneider Electric. If you don't know who Schneider Electric is, I'll tell you in a minute. My title, though, is Supply Chain Security, and really I'm a product security officer, but I also am focused not only on our product security, but also our supply chain. And so when I started working initially with SBOMs, I led all of the initiatives for the secure development lifecycle and everything in regarding that. And that meant I had to respond to customers on assessments and so on and so forth. And you'll see how that drew me into the SBOM world. So I'm also the author, I'll show the book at the end, of the Software Supply Chain Security, Securing the End-to-End Supply Chain for Software, Firmware, and Hardware with O'Reilly Media. All right, so who is the company? Who knows already Schneider Electric? Yay, yay. So Schneider Electric, we're a multinational company, and we're not German. We are actually based out of France. So we are on the Paris Stock Exchange. And so that means that we are a foreign company operating in the US, and we own some US companies and such. And our leadership is global, definitely spread around the world. 36 billion euro company, and some of the brands you'll see at the top right that you might recognize, Square D, which if you've ever seen a green box next to a building or anything, or circuit panels or anything, that most likely in this place you've got Square D products, because low voltage and medium voltage products, that company is from, I think, the 50s, very long standing. APC, how many had the APC desktop backup systems on your desks in the 80s, 90s, and everything? That's one of our brands. A lot of what we do in that secure power area is in data centers. So that has big three-phase UPSs securing, all the racks, and so we're still heavily into that. They make gaming units that you can, keep on your still on your systems at home, but primarily it's in data center and any kind of market where they need to worry about sort of that management of power. And then Aviva, industrial automation. We've got a lot of programmable logic controllers, things like that. Aviva, if you're in the manufacturing space, you may be familiar with the software. So we have also smart meters. We have programmable logic controllers, so a lot of industrial automation kind of pieces. Big kind of footprint. I would say overall from a product base, and this is just sort of a general guess, of the intelligent digital products, 80% of them are operational technology or industrial IoT. And then another portion of that is the software that communicates with them, and it's a lot of on-premise software, like buildings operations software that runs buildings like this, a lot of power management, things like that. And then finally, we do have cloud and SaaS apps, but when it's such a small amount of your footprint. So I work a lot with critical infrastructure, and that's how it got into the world of SBOMs. So because we have about 15,000 intelligent products, I have a lot of suppliers. Oh, I'm sorry, my water's right there. I have a lot of suppliers that are spread globally. And I have a lot of product teams that are spread globally. We have 14,000 people in R&D. And 4,000 or so developers, and 500 projects running at a time. And like I said, all these products, and these products last more than just a few years. The firmware PKI certificates we issue are 30 years. 30-year certificates, because OT, it just keeps running and running and running. So we have a lot of what you might consider legacy hardware and software and firmware out there. And so managing all of that, and it's different. I mean, I'm sure everybody realizes you're deploying SaaS or something like that. Of course, it's upgraded immediately. You could have for firmware over its lifetime, 40, 60 versions, right? And probably almost all of those are still installed somewhere because nobody's upgrading them. So it's a really large landscape of products, especially when you're revising it. Now, some of the products, they only do updates once a quarter, once a year, maybe 2 times a year. Not a lot of frequency in the operational technology space, not like you would see in the SaaS world. And so all of these different suppliers and product teams are what is, makes this such a significant kind of activity for us to understand what's in our software. So I'm not going to go through this slide. When I do a different presentation on our supply chain security, and essentially our SBOM initiative is sort of in here, but it's really a transversal initiative now because it's tied to our vulnerability management, it's tied to third-party security, customer and authority requirements, because customers would like the SBOMs now. But so we're using it really throughout this cycle, and that's what I'm going to show you. All right, so why we got into it, if you're sitting in an SBOM talk, who here, I don't want to say that way. I'm going to explain SBOM in just a second. Just in case there's somebody who had not been in one of these talks before. So we, like I said, sell a lot of hardware, and it has let's say firmware, embedded software, whatever words you want to call it. And so picture a product. So any kind of product that you might have, and if it's an intelligent product, it's going to have some embedded operating system, so Linux or something else. There's commercial embedded operating systems like Wind River, VxWorks, things like that. It has proprietary software, such as the code that we write. It has open source libraries, most likely. I've only got one product in my entire portfolio that I found, and I drilled them hard. I'm like, you sure you don't have any open source? But they didn't. Which I'm still, I still want to scan it just to walk through the code myself. And then you can buy commercial components. So for example, Microsoft.NET DLL, I don't have the SBOM for that. So for software that we have that's running, that's based off the .NET framework, and we do have applications that are doing that, or Java DLLs. I don't have the SBOMs yet for that. So actually, this could be unknowns because they could be using open source, and until I get the SBOMs. Now, there are people who have already unpacked it all and said, here's the SBOM. I really would like it from Oracle and Microsoft. I just haven't gone through the process to ask. So that's part of when you're seeing an SBOM, think of this tree. I'll probably use the term transitive dependencies. If you're not familiar with that, it's like, what are the dependencies upstream? I'm not going to go too deep into any of that, because what I'm really going to show you is how we're leveraging our SBOMs. So the reason we had to leverage them is, and these are available in different forms. I'm not sure if OWASP puts it, but I do this presentation at some other places, so I know that they're out there, and I could probably direct you to it. So I started into this because the utility industry, critical infrastructure, updated their contract template, and all of a sudden, back in 2019, I received contracts that said, we must provide SBOMs. And I went to my vulnerability management team who had mentioned SBOMs in meetings, and I said, what's going on? And they're like, so NTIA has these working groups, so I started attending the working groups all the way back in 2019. And at the end of that year, I said, we need an adoption and awareness group at one of the things. So I didn't call it that, but that's what they labeled it. Because I said, if people aren't talking about SBOMs, you've really got to do the change management with it. So as part of that, I also helped update some of the language. So what became the 14028 order, that definition, had done some tweaking, so I was really excited when it came out. So with the customer requirements and then the executive order, which came after I made a change into our world, I had enough leverage in the company to be able to say, I want to do SBOMs. So I had created this slide all the way back then and said, okay, and this has been updated since then. So there's different kinds of requirements, but I first started with the procurement reason. I got customers who demanded it. At that first few months, I was redlining it because I couldn't do it. I mean, couldn't give it to customers, so it couldn't be in a contract at that moment. But because that was a requirement, I was able to make some adjustments, especially after the executive order came out. Now we've seen it. I'm not in the medical product world, so FDA is not one of my required delivery standpoints, but if this was for somebody in the medical field, they'd also have listed FDA as somebody that you need to provide SBOMs. So regulations, also the EU Cyber Resilience Act requires SBOMs. Germany already has its requirements drafted and final of what you need to provide. I'm working with the NSA on a update to the NIAP program, which certain products in here would be. So I'm working with someone from the NSA. We've got a small team, how they can use and leverage SBOMs so that they can certify the products, but also the ongoing vulnerability management. So I'm everywhere from an SBOM kind of world. I work with the Department of Energy, the Citrix program, which I'm not going to remember the full name. I think it's down here somewhere. It used to be, or maybe it's on a different slide. When they're validating our products as part of this program for critical infrastructure, they ask for the SBOMs. Of course, they run their own products, other products that can generate the SBOMs, but we provide it as part of that. And I work a lot with CISA and everybody else. Now, NTIA started the SBOM working groups, and now it's that. And so this is what I had my consultants also create to say, this is my vision. So I show up right before lockdown in February, because RSA was early that year, to talk with Dr. Alan Freeman. And I said, I know everybody's here in this little crawl stage, but I'm expecting 4,000 to 10,000 SBOMs in the next couple of years. I got to get to here. I've got to think about scale. And I've got to think about merging, because a product that has a system is basically multiple SBOMs together. So that UPS that I talked about in the data center, it has an HMI, so a human machine readable interface, the little black screens usually. It has the logic built into it, so it's got its own core component, and then it's got network cards that we sell for it. So I got 3 SBOMs just to make a system, right? If you got, an iPhone, when you received this, it had 50 apps pre-installed. So just on that system, if you had the SBOMs, you'd have to have all of the SBOMs for that upon delivery and all the firmware and everything else. So it's a much bigger problem than just, I just want an SBOM. And people don't realize, well, which product is it for? Because it could be like a massive amount of SBOMs. And so this sort of brain of bringing it all together to a complete SBOM, I think Cisco calls it a one BOM or product BOM. Some people call it a product BOM. Cisco, I think, is the one BOM. We all have sort of different names. Some people call it a system BOM. But you could have different components. So I could have the proprietary code I mentioned, third-party code, and open source code. And what I'm going to show you some examples of is how we're leveraging it to find other pieces like OpenSSL and Log4j and everything based off of the collection that we've developed. But part of what I had to work through is be able to provide that to customers, and not through email and not on a SharePoint, because I needed, if I'm going to have 4,000 to 10,000 sort of versions, and that's just production releases, all right? That's not dev releases. I don't even ask for those. I don't want them. Sort of muddies the water. But to be able to give them direct to customers was really important so that they can use it for risk management. So I'm not sure if any of you are requesting SBOMs from your suppliers, but critical infrastructure is definitely doing that. Indirect customers, I'm working with asset management companies to try to get to the point where they're ingested. And the reason that's important, which is a hard problem because nobody actually documents in their asset management systems their firmware or software versions. So even our own asset management system, I tried to find a Schneider product that we see it in the asset management system, but it doesn't have the firmware version. I'm like, well, I can't give you an SBOM because I don't know which version it is. So it's a long way to go when it comes to asset management. But in theory, you shouldn't have to be able to download an SBOM and then install it into whatever tools you're using or whatever. You really should be tying it into your risk management process and alerting systems. And that's what you would normally expect out of more modern kind of systems. But what if I'm releasing a new product every 5 months? You get a new SBOM, but you haven't upgraded the firmware in that system. So you could be like, oh, we're clear, because they don't have this anymore. But in the older version, I might have had that. So it's really important that you are aware of what's installed. And so we've got such a long way to go in regards to asset management and SBOM usage. And I'll talk about that at the end, some of the gaps. CP CERT is the main piece that we're using it for. Our product cert, whatever you want to call it, internal certification. We have a vulnerability management team, and then we have distributed vulnerability management handlers. And what that means is when Log4j happens, we have something called an impact analysis, and I'll show that later. And then other R&D teams. So we have code that we build in-house, reusable components. There's, of course, a library that they can go to, but being able to, let's just say, hey, is it using this version and does it have this open source because I'm building for this kind of environment and I'm not allowed to use these kind of licenses or whatever. Having that visibility without having to, walk through the code, and the project, it makes it a lot easier so that they're aware. So those are the different kinds of uses that we're doing for SBOMs. And so that's where I'm going to dive into the vulnerability management now. So we have something that's called impact assessments. It could be definitely called something different. And so this is the typical before SBOM Log4j incident. By the way, we had SBOMs, not like for every product by then, but when Log4j happened, we had SBOMs. And I think like first.org had rejected our talk saying they could have had SBOMs back when Log4j happened. I'm like, yeah, we did. So we certainly did. So what happens, I told you the CP CERT goes and talks to all those teams. So I just told you I've got 500 projects, I've got all these different teams, and some of those products are fairly old and they're working on the newer generation and this and that. But they are expected, and I know anybody who's in sort of like the embedded software world, same kind of thing. It's like, are you affected? Are you not affected? Do you have it? You can't just assume when you see it that they're affected because there could be compensating controls. They might have removed that piece of code. You can't trust everything. So you have to have validation. But this process, we all run through JIRA. It goes out. It's well executed. We have on average about 30 to 40 major impact assessments a year. So think celebrity CVEs. They go through that. The Log4j, of course, had 2, right? 2 CVEs. And that means that all of the vulnerability handlers and all of those products had to respond whether or not they were impacted and declare. And so I'll be talking about sort of that, how long that takes in just a minute. So they create the impact assessment, send it out to everybody, and then it comes back, and those that are affected, we issue a security disclosure, right? Sounds pretty normal if this is your world that you're having to live in. Now, when you do that, you can't wait until everybody answers the question of affected or not. So even Log4j, I mean, we released our first security disclosure within 2 days, and then we kept appending and updating it. And one product that we said was clear came back later, and we had to adjust it. And I had a CISO say, what happened? You said it was good. I'm like, because a third-party supplier told us that they were affected. And so when you don't have all the transitive dependencies or all the answers to the test, or it's a compiled binary where you have no idea, then you can't answer, there can be changes to that answer. And that's where really putting together the complete SBOM with all the transitive dependencies and really knowing is very important from a standpoint of going further and further for usage for vulnerability management. But even if I had identified it in that supplier, I still would have had to wait for the answer. So it would have been just an in progress or unknown or investigation. and not a definitive yes, no like we did. And that's where things are going more toward. So here's just some pictures of some products. And all right, so with SBOMs, do the same thing, but now we search the database. And I'm going to show you screen captures of how we do it. I would say that overall, even before we got the tool that I'll show you that we're using, we had it all like in box folders and things like that, so we could do searches. I mean, it's not rocket science, especially, but when you have the massive amount that we have, being able to generate reports to be able to send to the team and eventually create the tickets that we need. There's still a lot of work to do for that, because when you have a massive inventory of products, and a lot of these products have changed names over the years. So you could have one firmware for 20 different products because they all use the same base architecture, but yet they've been known under so many different names and so on and so forth. So it's really, it could be a one-to-many, like one firmware to many, and then, like I said, you could have one product with many SBOMs. So it's a really complicated situation to say, okay, please answer for this product, and you can't guarantee that the next CVE in the same OpenSSL or whatever, they're going to have to answer it again. So it does take a lot of time, which means you still have to go to the teams. But now what we can say is, we see it in your SBOM. You must reply in this SLA, get on it, and respond as quickly as possible. Because what was happening before is they'd be like, okay, well, we'll look at it probably in the next sprint and so on and so forth, and somebody, you know, has to suffer through digging through the code and searching for it and so on and so forth. So the SBOMs really have helped us speed up when it's a known component. So proprietary software, things like .NET, Java, easy to find, and even open source, you know, the standard scanners that recognize things. But if you have a library that you bought from someone, so let's just say Cassie's Calc that I bought from the Crossley group a few years back, it's not recognized, signatures aren't found, so even my normal open source scanners are not going to pick it up like they can pick up .NET. So you still need to be able to append and adjust if you're generating SBOMs, to be able to add those details to it. And that's, again, one of the things that we are having to do a lot of work to improve because of my legacy products. So that one data center product that we've done a full illumination had 10 commercial libraries, none of which got picked up in our open source scanning tool because there were libraries that we bought probably over a decade ago. And no continued contracts because we bought the source code. So there's no pearls, there's nothing, there's no hashes because in some cases it's a copy and paste, I mean, legacy, right? So we still have to go to the teams, but now with our tools, especially this one, we're able to augment and enhance those SBOMs along with the tool that we use, but also by ourselves to be able to see something. So for example, and I'll show you a picture in a minute, you could run it through many different kinds of tools and it can't register the difference between version 1.2 and 1.3 because there were very few changes. Or it may come back saying no version found. And then what do? You have to assume that it's version 0 and every CVE that's ever been in that open source package is now in your world. And so there's a lot of cleanup if you're using scanning tools. And honestly, we have so many different companies that we've bought over time and that we have so many different build pipelines, some of which I wouldn't even call a pipeline. I would call it a batch script or something else like that because it's really old. There's not, you know, a nice seamless pipeline that we can say, oh, everybody start doing this. So we've got a couple products that have now incorporated SBOM generation using Yocto, Zephyr, and I forgot some of the other one. I know Azure DevOps and some of the other ones can create SBOMs, and I'm sure there's other tools that the teams just haven't engaged it yet to be able to create the SBOMs. But 98% of the SBOMs we have, we're generating out of binaries, which means that we're only as good as our scanners can tell until the team enhances it. So Just quick, I mentioned about how long it takes, the long tail. So our projects, to really just be able to do it, targets, KPIs, whatever you want to do, our average impact assessment, long tail, so the last two come to the, across the line, was in the 30 plus days to be able to get all the answers from all the teams. So imagine you have 30 impact assessments a year, and then each one on average was taking over 30 days to finish. So that means they weren't even finished with one before the next one came. It just was rolling and rolling and rolling. So they were spending a lot of time just being able to give it's in or it's out. So from a developer standpoint, development team standpoint, they find it very advantageous for SBOMs to be provided so that at least they themselves can say, yes, it's in here, or no, it's not in here. They don't even have to really say much to know. If it's not showing on the report and they say no, we trust them now, right? So one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning is this whole SBOM process, and the reason why I was able to do some of the adjustments is I owned the product security policy. So being the owner and with all the regulations, I said, we're going to start capturing SBOMs. But they weren't having to do hardly anything at that point in time. And still, it's helping them in the reduction of their impact assessments. Now, the other thing is the reducing the time, is by being able to say, it's definitely in your product and it's in this place, they're able to assign somebody immediately. And instead of going through, especially if it's a common package, like we've already answered you 16 times in the last 2 years, we do not have OpenSSL in this package. And it's easy to believe them now because we have those SBOMs. So they've actually had a significant reduction in time at the developer level. And when you're multiplying, the Log4j for all of the analysis was over 10,000 hours that it took. And that's when we had SBOMs. So there were times that just on a standard celebrity CVE, it's 5,000 hours or more, if it's complicated. When we had something like Trek, some of these you may not know the names because you don't work with those products, or Wind River's Urgent 11, yeah, that was a lot of thousands, tens of thousands of hours that sometimes vulnerabilities take. And by now being able to note which libraries are in which, it's really important. The other advantage, which isn't here, is that as a developer, and especially as a project manager, I would make sure all the licenses were up to date and all of that when we first added them, and then we would never look at that spreadsheet again. It's like, oh, we're good, we're good. We don't ever have to upgrade. Come on. We didn't have to upgrade, right, before cyber. Unless I had a bug. And so we just set it and forget it. And you can't do that with cyber anymore, right? And also what the SBOM is giving them from a visibility standpoint is when OpenSSL came out, I had one product that had 6 different versions of OpenSSL. Now that could have been because of transitive dependencies. And it could have been because they were incorporating different reusable components that had a different version and so on and so forth. But they didn't have that visibility because they'd look at one section or another section, and nobody was really responsible for making sure from a tech debt standpoint, from an upgrade path standpoint. And so that, some of my products had 2 of the end of life versions that were affected and then 4 current versions. And you can't, if somebody else is using this version and you're not the owner of that code, let's say if it's a commercial library, there's not much you can do. But from a consolidation and a risk posture standpoint, looking at these SBOMs from their view and for them to be able to recognize, oh, I have this third party, I should be paying attention. Making sure that the most prevalent open source that we're tracking on in the dark web through our threat intelligence tools, it's helping a lot. So in that tool that I'm going to show you, there's a dashboard feature which I don't give you a picture of, but now I know all of the major open source that we're using and the major versions, and we're using it to clean up and improve the tech debt, all because of SBOMs. All right, so here's the picture, just one of the pictures. So just in this, there is a product view, which I don't show. So if you are a customer and you want to see the Ion 8650 smart meter that goes on the side of the house, and you want to see the SBOM for that, we give them access into this tool, and they only see the products that they're allowed to see. We brand label some of our competitors' products, they brand label us. I'm not going to give to any customer and to anybody else access to every single SBOM I have. So that's one of the advantages that I'm able to use it as a customer sharing tool, and they can download in the two main formats, CycloneDX and SPDX. And there's an ability to download VEX, and I'm not going to talk about VEX today, but Vulnerability Exploitability Exchange, because I don't have any VEX records yet. But in that, I have it in the Customer Security Advisory Framework, CSAFs. So all of these different products, and this screen capture is old, so I don't have a picture. But if there were multiple releases of that Altivar machine ATV 340, it would show it too. So those are the software components. That's what we think, and that's what, as developers, we're used to seeing. So this could be called, Cassie's machine or infrastructure machine, who knows? But the code and how it's, sometimes installer.exe. How many people have 30 versions of installer.exe? So you've got the software components, but we have products that release once a year, so you would see 2, but you might see it as 2023 and 2024. So that gives us some visibility and has some other features, such as I can see just the latest release. As I mentioned, I don't take the development versions because I don't want them. It's too much from an overhead standpoint. It would confuse the audience. Looking to be able to create a platform, but they've got enough tools in our company that they can see some of the CVEs. But if I did, I'd set them up where their build path, unless it's a final release, would tag to that. All right, so this is what I think a lot of you are sort of wondering because of the Log4j and OpenSSL, and I've got a few screen captures. So in this case, like I said, unknown version. That means in my product set of what I've uploaded, there were products that didn't know what version of OpenSSL. So using this, I've been able to go back and find the unknown versions and ask the teams, hey, we've got to clean this up. I don't know, what the version is, but I have to assume that this product now has every OpenSSL CVE showing in my screen. I don't show you too much of those screens. So OpenSSL in this one has got a low and medium vulnerability. In that version, that means a product or maybe multiple products have CVEs because they're using that, because there was some vulnerabilities in there. So I'll show you a picture where you can actually see a different picture of lookup. So you can see just in, I'll look at all these different kinds of versions. I mean, and this list went on for at least another page. And it doesn't show it on this one, but some of them would say SE because we've branched versions, not of OpenSSL, but I mean, people branch. So we note which ones we've branched, and I can see when I'm looking at components. It's giving me visibility from both a vulnerability management place, but again, that tech debt that we have out here, and where do I want to focus? So in that case where it was in the one of the OpenSSL issues was in, of course, a major CVE was in end of life code, and this is how it doesn't show you. I think it's somewhere down there. They now identify end-of-life code. If it's known, we know lots of open source is just zombie code, right? So here's another picture of the OpenSSL where it gave me the CVEs. So now my vulnerability management team, or even those that in my group, it can actually pick up kevs, because I'm like, why is it a kev? A lot of times it's because it's the unknown version. Right? I'm like, you've got to clean this up. Because if I provide this SBOM to a customer, they can put it in the same tool. In fact, there was just the press release that the US government has signed an additional contract with Cybeats. This is Cybeats, C-Y-B-E-A-T-S, Cybeats SBOM solution, where they're going to use the same one. So if I'm giving that SBOM that I can see vulnerabilities to the US government agencies, they can see them, right? In the view that I give them right now, they don't see the CVEs, because I don't want to give them the view. I mean, you go run it through dependency track or whatever you want. You're going to come up with your own answers if you're not going to see the same tool anyway. Everybody, everything's going to show different. But this has been a real game changer for us to clean and manage all of the vulnerability. And so here's Log4j. So on this one, what you're seeing right now is that dependency lookup. So it actually will tell me, so if it had CVEs, I'd know not only would it have the CVE that you just saw, but then I'd see the dependency lookup. And that saves us so much time, right? You can generate reports, it can do whatever. But let's say we have something and in the first 20 minutes, we want to be able to address those right away. If you've got a critical CVE, we generate this report, we go straight to those teams, we know who to go to. And if it's August in France, then you know that you're going to have to call them off vacation. So that's just the way it is. And, or Christmas holiday if it's Log4j. So that's how we're leveraging it. I know it's not a live screen that we're seeing there. So overall, we've been able to save, I don't have a real number, but I think just in the last 3 years, I have saved the company hundreds of thousands of development hours with the visibility of SBOMs. But that's because I have a big product portfolio and all of those developers. You could be in a smaller company and some of these answers come real quick or whatever. But for us, it's a game changer where even if you're running scanning tools, what I didn't say is the CVEs and everything gets updated like pretty much real time. When I'm using a scanning tool and binary analysis tool, you've got to rescan. Well, we don't have the gazillion binaries that we've released over time in those tools. It's just storage nightmare. So by keeping the SBOMs, we have, and we actually do keep their binaries when they give it to them, so that we can rescan it through some of those tools or whatever, or validate it at the time. But just the visibility that it's giving us and that transparency both to customers and ourselves has made a world of difference. And increasing awareness is a big thing. So some of the problems I've already mentioned on the binary scanning tools, they're not meant to be all. I know there's other tools out there that can do a better job looking for commercial libraries. The overall goal for us is to move it into the build pipeline. My target for that is 80%. It's not going to be everybody because, like I said, some of them are really old pipelines and not a pipeline. But to get the majority of them in there, or for them to be able to validate and update those pearls or other information and the missing version numbers means a lot. And then from a supplier standpoint, like I said, I've got to now, if I don't have the source code, I've got to work with those suppliers to get it. I've got a product assessment process, so every new supplier, product security supplier, we ask for SBOMs. But I'm still got to go back to all the other ones that are not new and collect all their SBOMs, and they're hesitant. I don't blame them because it's such a new kind of thing. What are you going to do with them? What are you going to use them for? So I meet individually with a lot of the suppliers, and I'm sort of scheduling something. So I've got time to take questions, and I'll be out in the hallway afterwards.
I have the mic right here if you have a question.
Great. Hand right there.
So many of the dependencies that I've seen in our code bases have been copy-paste from open source, where the license itself is contained in like the opening paragraph. Like this license is, you can use it for whatever, right? It doesn't actually give you what the official license would be categorized. And then there's some disclaimer code or disclaimer sentences, and then the rest of the code.
Yep.
How do you account for all of that with the tools that you're using?
it's a journey. So if it's copy paste, especially for a lot of ours, what we didn't ask before and what we do now is we were only asking, tell us about all your third-party dependencies and licenses if you have a risk. And I changed, again, owning the policy and sort of the process sort of helps. So a year and a half ago, I said, no, I want them to document all of the ones. So we're able to look at the licenses and pieces, but they're still coming up when, like I mentioned the HMI. How do I know it's not a copy paste and there's not really code in there? How do I know when I'm seeing 20 open source and 5 commercial libraries that it's not another 5 commercial libraries? So for example, Intel libraries, SDKs, things like that are included, those get missed. They're not included from that standpoint. Or it could be a driver, they didn't think about that, and that's really important. So it is the quality of that, especially for older products, are a challenge, and as more people take binaries, reverse engineer them, and come back and ask questions. So I've got a presentation that I've done and been working with a company that's illuminated it. They used a tool called Adelis, and it was able to find out that one of our code pieces had Siemens listed on it, and it turns out that there was a joint venture with a company called PLM and Siemens, and eventually Schneider bought PLM. So the provenance information, which is a bit of what you're asking for, is really hard to normally detect unless you have really deep tools that are going at that level. So that team had to explain some of the history, so we pieced everything together, but normally we're not even concentrating on that at the moment. There's way bigger fish to fry, like keeping things remediated at the moment. Yeah. Question in the back, in the hat.
So I see that you have 4,000 plus SBOM being generated, and I am assuming 4,000 plus SBOM generated for internal products. And I'm assuming that you have a lot of automation to discover and manage these SBOMs internally. So what are the challenges that you are facing and how you are dealing with this vast number of SBOM?
Yeah, it's not a lot of actually automation at this point, because when a product, we have about 30 to 50 product releases every month. And so some of the teams have given us the back binaries, and that's why there's so many, that's why the volume's so high. But when there's 50 projects, the majority of them, unless they're SaaS, I don't ask for SaaS SBOMs, when they release, we have to go get the binary. So the first 2 years, the metric was how many of those did we get generated with my team? And it doesn't take, somebody gives you the binary and we run it. It took a lot to be able to hit 100%. Now everybody, it's routine, right? But I want it into the build pipeline process. So it doesn't take a lot of work for us now that they understand the process and see the value, but it's not automated enough, and that's where you put it in the build pipeline. So, yes.
So you mentioned that you saved hundreds of thousands of developer hours.
Yeah, I'm guessing. Don't quote me, please.
So
yeah.
for an organization that doesn't have an SBOM program but would like to show some kind of savings,
Yep.
how would you go about calculating?
So again, from the KPIs, it was how long did it take us to get answers and responses, and so it was a scale. So, for example, the Log4j 2 CVEs spread out to 500 product teams. I would say on average it's about 3,000 firmware software, software components, because again, multiple ones are using SKUs. So if it's a really small team, then showing the value is being able to respond to a customer. Like now, I don't have to go back to the team. If they validated that, I never have to bother them again, as long as the quality of the SBOM. So they get off the hook. I can say, okay, you don't have to worry about this or answer these questions anymore. Because what was happening also is sometimes they would get questions about, are you using this license or this or that? So I'm saving them time that way because it includes the license information, because you've got people when they're doing procurement. So it's helped on procurement. So I don't cover that area. It saved the development piece time. But overall, I think people may have some other suggestions that are more on the startup or sort of other realms. And really, if you're in a modern pipeline, getting an SBOM set up and generated, super easy. It's more about the process of how you're going to deliver it continuously to who wants it than it is about the actual generation of it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Because I think we're at time. One question, and then I'll be outside.
So you mentioned that you don't currently do SaaS.
Right.
Is there a reason why?
Yes, because, again, off the record, there was a big debate in the SaaS-BOM working group, and they couldn't agree on what a SaaS-BOM was. So the working group, sorry if you were on it, did not succeed. So whenever I talk about SaaS-BOM, I send people to the Cyclone DX page. But not a single customer has asked for a SaaS-BOM from me yet. And that's another reason why I haven't put any attention on it. Because if they're not asking, I'm not going to go through the problem to do it. Now, all of those teams have the ability, because they're in more modern situations, where they have their own information on licensing and open source. And for Log4j, all of those products that were SaaS remediated within 24 hours, right? I mean, they're like this. By the time they could generate a new SBOM, they would already have fixed the problem. So being able to keep up with that now, products that, for example, Cybeats is a SaaS product, they're generating builds and updating all the time, and he's got that huge collection of all the releases. And so it's completely possible to create a SaaS BOM, but there's not an official schema out there, and nobody's asking for it. And that's why. So I let them off the hook because nobody in the government in the US or anywhere else, in fact, what was it just released, again said SaaS is out of scope. So they're going to continue to leave SaaS out of scope because this is more of a static point in time. And if they want that information, they can generate it at that time from a procurement reasons. So, all right, I think that's the end of my time, right? All right, thank you. I'll be outside if you want to check.